Then one more summary or summarization of data can also be helpful in understanding whether there are any errors or how to reduce the dimension of the data set, and that is to use a table, a frequency table, or one-dimensional frequency table will be like a bar chart table. Okay, you have the different categories and the frequency for each category, or you can have a two-dimensional table, which is your pivot table. Okay, and you can have aggregate statistics, so aggregated by some grouping value. So those are the topics that we're going to look at now. The table function is pretty straightforward. You can use table, and then you select a categorical variable, say for example, the Charles River, and that's going to give you um, the different values of Chas and the frequency of those values. Okay, so that's your table, and you can obviously save it as a data frame and do some additional stuff you like um, in the table. So that's just going to give you frequency. Okay, and the summary and supply that we saw before is going to give you summary statistics for the entire column. But what if we want those statistics grouped by a categorical variable? We did that in chapter 3, group by a certain categorical variable and then use that for plotting purposes. So here we're going to look at the same thing. Instead of group by, we'll use the aggregate function. So aggregate function has um, these parameters. Okay, so you can have the first one is the R object, and it can be a data frame, and then you specify by. So the by is a list, so you can have several variables in there and categorical variables, and the observations will be categorized or grouped by these variables that you give as a list. And then you have the parameter fun, okay, and that tells us what statistic you want. Okay, if you say fun equal to mean, then it will compute the mean for each of those groupings. If you say SD, it's going to compute standard deviation and so on. But if you want percentile, then it becomes a little complicated, and we will see how to do that. Okay, and then you have a couple of more. Suppose when you're doing aggregation in two dimension, there may be combinations where there may not be any observations at all, and you can drop those combinations by saying whether true or false, and simplify is for simplifying the output result. Okay, so let's look at examples now. Start with a simple example. Okay, so aggregate BHDF, say we want to aggregate just one variable, so medv, okay, and then you say by equal to what? So that has to be a list, so you need to say list BHDF by say Chas, okay, and then you need to specify what we want. So we say mean, then it's going to give you group. Okay, so it's grouped by Chas equal to 0. What is the mean? For Chas equal to 0, Chas equal to 1, what is the mean? Okay, you can change the column name if you capture it in a variable, then you can go and change the name. Okay, suppose if you specify another variable in the list, right? bh.df, say cat medv. So now you have two variables for the by. Okay, now let's see what happens now. So you have the first one Chas 0, cat medv 0, Chas 1, cat medv 0. Then Chas 0, catmate be 1, and then both 1. Okay. And each of those groups, what is the mean? So this is the basic idea. Now let's look. So that's okay. So let's separate this out. So this here is where I need to say grouped by 2 variables. This is grouped by 1 variable. So let's keep it 1 variable here. So that's just grouped by Chas. Now this one is grouped by Chas and catmate B. Okay. Now suppose we want the 5th percentile of all numerical variables grouped by this. So previously we did the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile without any grouping for the entire column, right? So now we're going to do grouping, and then we're going to do 5th percentile, and if you can build, if you want 95th and then 90th percentile, you can always build on it like we have done previously. Okay. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So it's going to be using user defined function. Instead of using mean, we're going to define that function. All right, so that will be aggregate, right? So say BH okay, dot DF okay, and by equal to list. Okay, we want that one. Okay, these two variables. So put that there. Okay, and then we are not going to use a standard function. So we're going to specify our own function. So it's a function x. Okay, I don't function x space, right? And then we say quantile, okay, x 0.05. Okay. Now for each of these groups, then you have the 5th percentile for all the variables. Okay. Now if you don't want some of the variables, okay, then you can do this, specify the variables for which you want these. Suppose we don't want the 4th variable, the 10th variable. Okay, so let's look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, because Chas is what we are grouping by. So we don't want Chas, right? Okay, 4, and then 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is tax. So we don't want tax, and then these two are the target variables. So we'll get rid of those two, 13 and 14, and we want the aggregation for all the other variables. Now, if you want 5th percentile and several other percentiles, we can capture all of them into different variables and then put them all together with a R bind or C bind to have a aggregated set of summary values. Okay.